In an industry as big as gaming, there are a multitude of developers with aspirations to make it big. Some fail, and some succeed. However, there are a few journeys that end with failure, one of which is the explosive rise and eventual decline of Telltale Games, a studio that revolutionized storytelling, created unforgettable moments for millions of players, and then withered away almost overnight. But to understand how this story ends, we need to go back to where it began, in the dying days of the adventure game genre. The 90s were a golden age of point and click adventure games. Studios like LucasArts and Sierra created beloved classics Monkey Island, Day of the Tentacle, King's Quest, the list goes on. And these games prioritized story and puzzle solving over action, creating experiences that valued wit over reflexes. But by the early 2000s, the industry had begun to change. Partly due to Doom becoming an industry powerhouse, first person shooters began to dominate the charts. Publishers wanted action, explosions, multiplayer experiences, and eventually, adventure games were declared dead. Their style of storytelling deemed too slow and unfortunately too niche for modern audiences. At LucasArts, a group of developers watched as their beloved genre faded away, taking decades of blood, sweat, and tears with it. The final straw came in 2004 when LucasArts cancelled Sam & Max Freelance Police, a sequel fans had waited years to play. But for free developers, Dan Connors, Kevin Bruner, and Troy Melander, this wasn't the end. It was an opportunity. And in June 2004, they founded Telltale Games in San Rafael, California. Their vision was ambitious but focused, revive adventure games by reimagining them for a modern audience. But they knew in order to break the mold, they needed to do things a little differently. Their first innovation was structural. Instead of releasing complete games, they would adopt an episodic model inspired by TV. Shorter episodes released regularly would keep players engaged while allowing for more sustainable development cycles. It was a radical idea at the time, and predating TV's move to streaming services. Their first release wasn't what anyone really expected, a game called Telltale Texas Hold'em. Launched in early 2005, it was essentially a poker game with personality. But even this simple title showcased what would become Telltale's greatest strength: character interaction and dialogue. Their first true narrative game came with the adaptation of Jeff Smith's Bone comics. While modest in scope, it proved that they could handle storytelling in the gaming medium. The characters felt authentic, the dialogue was sharp, and the world was faithful to its source material. And to keep the lights on, Telltale took on licensed work, creating games based on CSI. These projects weren't groundbreaking, but they taught the studio valuable lessons about working with established properties, experience that would eventually prove to be an important factor. Then came the moment that put them on the map. In 2006, they acquired the rights to create new Sam & Max games, the very franchise their founders had worked on at LucasArts. It was poetic justice, and they made the most of it. Sam & Max Season 1 proved their episodic model could work, and each month brought a new installment, each building on the last. The games weren't massive commercial hits, but they built a dedicated following and showed the industry that episodic gaming could work. The next few years they saw some steady growth. They released projects such as Strong Tales of Monkey Island, Wallace and Gromit's Grand Adventures, and Back to the Future the Game. Each of these products refined their formula, but they were still seen as a niche studio making games for niche audiences. Then came the deal that would change everything. In 2011, Telltale acquired the rights to make games based on The Walking Dead, but instead of adapting the TV show or directly following the comics, they made a crucial decision. They would tell their own original story based in the same universe. During development, they made another vital choice. Traditional adventure game puzzles would take a backseat for something new, meaningful choice and consequence. Players would make difficult decisions under pressure, and those choices would have lasting impacts on the story. When The Walking Dead Season 1 launched in April 2012, it was more than a success, it was revolutionary. The story of Lee Everett, a convicted criminal finding redemption through protecting a young girl named Clementine, resonated with players on a profound level. Numbers were unprecedented for Telltale. 28 million promises of stories to be told, garnering countless Game of the Year awards. Critics praise his emotional depth, his innovative approach to choice-based storytelling, and willingness to tackle difficult themes. And suddenly, everyone wanted to work with Telltale. Major licenses came calling, investments poured in, and the small studio that started with a humble poker game was now one of gaming's biggest developers. The Wolf Among Us, based on Bill Willingham's Fables comics, proved The Walking Dead wasn't a fluke. His noir-inspired tale of fairy tale characters in New York showcased a different side of Telltale's storytelling abilities. Tales from the Borderlands demonstrated their range, successfully translating Borderlands' quirky and edgy humor into a compelling narrative adventure, many considering it one of their finest achievements, perfectly balancing comedy and heart. And then Game of Thrones brought political intrigue and multiple playable characters. And while reactions were mixed, it showed that Telltale was willing to experiment with structure and perspective. This showed once again in their Batman series, which offered a fresh take on the Dark Knight, allowing players to shape both Bruce Wayne and Batman's approach to justice. The innovations in choice architecture influenced all of their later games, but success came at a cost. The studio expanded rapidly, perhaps too rapidly. From around 100 employees in 2012, they grew to over 350 by 2017. New projects were announced constantly. Minecraft Story Mode, Guardians of the Galaxy, more Walking Dead seasons, and soon after, with Netflix's choice to release shows in bulk, the tides were swaying to media becoming consumable. A constant flow of bingeable content and shows ultimately means that Telltale's model of biannual update is a drop in the ocean, except for dedicated fans. And with dedication comes expectation. Technical problems began to mount. Telltale used the same basic engine they developed for The Walking Dead, even as games became more ambitious. Frame rate issues, stuttering animations, and long load times became increasingly common complaints in the community. And behind the scenes, the situation was worse. Former employees began speaking out about pushing work conditions. Stories were beginning to emerge of constant crush, which is a familiar theme in the industry. They were working 80-hour weeks, they were cancelling holiday, perpetual overtime was popping up. The episodic model that had once been their strength became a burden, forcing teams to maintain exhausting production schedules. The studio's management structure was problematic, creative decisions were often changed late in development, and this ultimately forced teams to redo weeks of work. The focus on securing new licenses meant resources were stretched thin across too many projects. Players started noticing issues too. While individual episodes could still shine, many felt that the formula had grown stale. Choices seemed to have less impact. The illusion of consequence began to fade, and the market became saturated with Telltale releases, each new announcement generating less excitement than the last. Minecraft Story Mode represented both success and warning signs. While it sold well, especially to younger players, it led to an expensive deal with Netflix for an interactive version. This bet on streaming technology would prove costly and would mark the start of Telltale's downfall. And then came September 21st, 2018, a day that would ultimately shock the gaming industry. 250 employees arrived at work like any other morning. None knew that it'd be their last day at Telltale. The announcement was brutal in its suddenness. Immediate closure, no severance pay, healthcare benefits ending in 9 days. Developers were given 30 minutes to collect their belongings and leave, and projects were cancelled mid-season. The gaming industry reacted with complete outrage. Other studios rushed to hire displaced developers, and a class action lawsuit was filed over labor law violations. Games began disappearing from digital stores as licenses expired, and postmortems revealed a complex web of problems. The studio's rapid expansion had left it vulnerable, and the expensive Netflix deal had strained all of their resources, and when major investors pulled out, there weren't enough funds to continue. However, Telltale's influence lived on. Their approach to interactive storytelling inspired countless games. Life is Strange, Detroit Become Human, and Until Dawn all built upon their foundation. They showed that players would embrace narrative games that prioritized emotional impact over traditional gameplay. Then, in 2019, an unexpected twist occurred. LCG Entertainment purchased Telltale's assets, promising to restore the studio with a different approach. The new Telltale would focus on sustainable growth, better working conditions, and updating their technology, which was a welcome change. The Wolf Among Us 2 was revived, with many original team members returning, but this time, the entire game would be completed before the first episode's release, a direct lesson from the past. Looking back, Telltale's story reflects larger issues in game development as a whole: the tension between creativity and commerce, the human cost of rapid growth, and the challenge of maintaining quality while meeting demanding schedules. Their innovations remain influential: choice-driven narratives, episodic releases, and characters that feel real enough to care about. These elements appear in games across the industry now, and it proves that Telltale's vision was ahead of its time. Perhaps most importantly, they proved that games could make us feel deeply. Lee's final moments, Bigby Wolf's moral struggles, Reese and Fiona's unlikely friendship. These stories connected with players in ways that transcended their technical limitations, and yet their impact on game narratives cannot be overstated. They showed that licensed games could tell original and meaningful stories. They proved that choice-based narratives could work on a large scale, and demonstrated that games could tackle mature themes with nuance and sensitivity. The fallout from Telltale's closure led to an important discussion about worker rights in the industry. It highlighted the need for sustainable development practices and better treatment of developers as a whole. And today, the new Telltale moves forward with lessons learned from the past: better technology, sustainable schedules, and complete games before release. Completely different approach, but one that honors the original studio's creative legacy. The community their games built remains active. There are plenty of fan theories, artwork, discussions about choices made years ago, and these all testify to the lasting impact of their storytelling. Their journey changed gaming forever. They revived adventure games by reimagining them. They proved that storytelling could be gaming's main attraction, and they showed that choices could matter, that characters could feel real, and that games could make us cry. The genre that helped establish continues to evolve. There are new technologies, new approaches, and new stories to tell every day, but at the core, many modern narrative games built on Telltale's foundation. The story of Telltale Games isn't just about the rise and fall of a studio. It's about innovation, ambition, and the power of interactive storytelling. About the people who push the boundaries and the players who embrace new ways of experiencing stories, and the lasting impact one studio can have on an entire industry. They were genuinely pioneers of their time. Their original motto was Telltale, the stories you can play, and in the end, they gave us more than that. They gave us stories we'll never forget. If you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to like and subscribe. Share your favourite Telltale memory in the comments below. What choice in their games hit you the hardest? Which moment made you pause the game to think about what you'd just done? If you found this breakdown useful, give the video a like and consider subscribing for more deep dives into the stories behind the games we play. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.